So tell me one story, one out
Okay,
of.
real quick. This is a quick story, but a very important. When I first started, I was mainly in charge of letting people get into the program. One of the first guys that comes in is a 6'6" black gentleman, uh, no smile on his face, 250 pound. And he sits down with me. I ask him, "Why are you here?" He says, "I was on my way to rob a bank, but I'm now in my 30s." He says, "They're going to kill me this time. I'm so big that I won't be able to get away. And I heard about your program. I wanted to come in." I said, "Well, one of the things that you have," he said, he says, I said, "Well, what drugs do you use?" "I take all kinds of drugs and I sell the drugs. And if the guys don't pay me, I break their legs." He says, "But I haven't killed anybody yet." So I said, "Oh yeah, okay." And I honestly, when I he looked at me, he didn't smile, but he looked at me, and I could see it through his eyes like bullets. I looked around behind me, like to make sure that they hadn't shot through me. I mean, that's how he didn't smile. He was mean, and uh, and he and I said, "Well, I think you're appropriate for the program. Some of the things you have to do is you have to volunteer. You have to spend 4 hours a day volunteering to be in the program to get all the benefits that we have." And I mean, he agrees and everything. I'm not in charge of that volunteer group, but once after they're there about a month or so, then if they get a job outside, I was in charge of the seeing the list of what kind of volunteer work they did. And if they were working outside, they had to do 2 hours a day of volunteer work. A month goes by, I see him. 2 months go by, I see him, but I don't see him on my list. Okay, and he's supposed to be on my list volunteering. And so I went up to his case manager. I said, "How come you don't have him on the list?" He says, "Well, I put him on the list." And he looked down at me and he pointed at me and he said, "Who in the hell do you think you are? I'm not on that list." And I took him off the list. I mean, this guy was scary. And so I said, "You have to tell him that in order to be in the program, it's not me, but in order to be in the program, you have to do the volunteer work." The next morning, I'm 5'5" when I stand up. When I'm sitting down, I'm 3'2". And this guy, the door swings open, and this big guy comes in, and he looks down at me. And again, I'm down sitting in a chair, and he says, "Who in the hell do you think you are?" And I looked at him and I stepped on my chair and I got up on my desk and I put my hand on his shoulder. And now I'm looking him straight in the eye. And I said, "You know what's right." And I smiled at him. And he looked at me like I was crazy. And he said, "I do." And he walked out of the room. He didn't say one other thing. He walked out of the room. After that, he was volunteer his regular time. He also volunteered to do extra work. And time goes by. 6 months later, he we if it, once they start working, we had another facility where they could live in a room where they had another house. Well, he moved there. He got married. He takes a course. He took a course at the university, so he started getting stuff. And then a year later, now he's not been using alcohol or drugs or everything. We needed a security person. So we hired him on weekends for security. He still didn't smile, maybe once a day or twice a day. And eventually, 3 years later, we put him in charge of all of our buildings. And he had a new child. And I mean, his whole life changed. Um, he lasted there until Brian. This is years later. I retired, and he still was there. And then one day, the all of the people from That's Place Central came to Brian's restaurant to eat, and he was still there, but uh, he had cancer. And then I know he passed away sometime after that. But his whole life changed, and it was an interesting thing because he'd been in jail like half his life, and so that's the one case. If you don't get many of those,